Hello there, seeker of silence, and welcome to this quiet refuge beneath the wandering stars, where weary minds can loosen their grip upon the day, and where ancient stories rise gently from the hush of forgotten halls. If these quiet tales bring you even a moment of peace, or help guide your thoughts toward softer pathways, feel free to subscribe so that our small circle of dreamers may continue to grow, each of us sharing in the gentle stillness of nights such as this. For now, let the world beyond your room fall into a distant murmur, like soft rain brushing peacefully across old stone, and let your breath find a slow, unhurried rhythm, as though matching the patient heartbeat of the mountains themselves. Tonight, our steps turn toward Kaer Morhen, the ancient keep of the witches, where time lingers differently, deep and steady, like a cold river running beneath layers of memory. Most travelers know only its ruins, its shattered walls, its echoing courtyards swept by winds that smell of pine, frozen earth, and the faint ashes of forgotten fires. But there are stories carved deeper than stone, older than the broken battlements, older even than the medallions that once gleamed upon every witcher's chest. And within these stories, whispered slowly by those who still remember the old ways, we find the beginnings of the witcher schools, the wolf, the cat, the griffin, and others whose emblems fade quietly into the mists of the past. You may imagine now a lone witcher, sitting in meditation among the tumbled rocks of the great hall, the moonlight brushing across his silver hair, the faint scratching of a quill drifting through the chamber as he writes upon a weathered journal of soft, yellowed pages. The scent of old parchment rises with every turn of a leaf, light as breath, mingling with the woody fragrance of the cracked beams overhead. Somewhere near the far hearth, a small ember snaps and glows, casting gentle gold upon the stones. Beyond the narrow windows, a quiet wind sighs along the cliffs, lifting specks of snow that glimmer like pale dust in the lantern glow. It is here, in this cradle of ruin and remembrance, that our storyteller waits, a witcher of many seasons who has wandered far from these crumbling walls, yet returns each winter to sit among its memories, listening to what the silence still knows. He breathes slowly, letting his thoughts unfurl like smoke. His eyes drift over the carved pillars, their surfaces smoothed by storms and centuries, and he begins to speak, not aloud, yet clearly enough that his words seem to float upon the dusty air itself, as though the keep itself were thinking through him. Long before Kaer Morhen became a ruin, he murmurs softly, it was a place of purpose, shaped by hands that trusted in discipline, knowledge, and the strange alchemy of destiny. But even earlier still, before the trials were written, before the oils were blended, before the medallions were forged, there were only scattered wanderers, hunters who walked alone through wild valleys where the world had only just begun to learn fear. His fingers glide over the spine of the journal, tracing the faint grooves left by years of use. He opens it slowly, the soft rasp of parchment rising like a quiet exhale, and the scent of ink and aged leather spreads gently through the hall. Rain taps lightly beyond the windows, its rhythm patient and steady like a distant lullaby. These early wanderers, he continues, did not yet call themselves witches. They were simply men and women who sought to understand the mysteries awakening in the dark places of the earth. Their strength was not yet sharpened by mutations, their senses not yet honed beyond the mortal coil. But they carried something else, something quieter, a curiosity, a yearning to learn what others feared to name. The witcher pauses, allowing the rain to fill the silence. It gathers in slow, silvery threads along the broken stones, whispering down into the hollow wells beneath the keep. The fire crackles faintly, as though nudging him onward. In time, he says, these wanderers found each other, not through summons or banners, but through the gentle pull of shared purpose. One by one they met upon lonely roads, or in the corners of forgotten libraries, or beside the hearths of wise herbalists who recognized the weight they carried. And slowly, patiently, they began to build something greater than themselves. He turns another page. The sound is soft, almost like a feather brushing stone. You may think the schools began as rival houses, he murmurs, but that truth came much later. In the beginning, there were only teachings, tender as seedlings passed from hand to hand. Some leaned toward agility and grace, others studied discipline and scholarship, others still sought harmony with the wild winds and high mountains, and from these quiet divergences, the first seeds of the schools were sown. The Witcher closes his eyes for a moment, letting memory settle. There is no urgency in him, only the steady rhythm of a soul woven long ago into the fabric of this place. In those days, he whispers, Kaer Morhen was not yet the stronghold of the wolf. It served instead as a gathering point, a quiet refuge for all who studied the craft. Its halls knew the footsteps of many paths, many philosophies, each one shaping the keep as surely as the stones themselves. The rain deepens slightly, its patter becoming a soft chorus across the courtyard. The Witcher listens, then speaks again, slower still. Tonight, he says, I will tell you of these beginnings, of the old wanderers, and of the gentler age that preceded the sword, of how the schools came to be not through strife, but through contemplation, patience, and the quiet work of those who wished only to understand the widening world. He breathes out, and the lantern flickers peacefully. Rest your thoughts now and let the story unfold at its own pace, as softly as snowfall across the broken towers of Kaer Morhen. And with that, the long tale of the Witcher schools begins to unfold like an ancient map, spread out beneath steady hands in the hush of a forgotten night. The Witcher sits a little straighter, as though some distant memory has touched the still surface of his mind. He draws a slow breath, letting the cool scent of moss and ancient stone fill his chest, and when he exhales, his voice drifts softly through the hall like a gentle wind through pine needles. In those earliest years, he murmurs, the world itself seemed unsettled, as though waking from a long sleep. Shadows lengthened in forests once peaceful, and strange whispers rose from caves where no man dared linger. Yet even then, quiet minds observed these changes without fear. They watched, they listened, and they walked calmly into places where others closed their doors and prayed for dawn. A page slips beneath his fingers, the parchment giving a faint crinkle, tender and worn. The subtle scratch of his quill follows, as though he wishes to anchor the memory before it fades again into the silence. These wanderers had no sigils, he says gently, no medallions to hum at the nearness of magic, no oils, no elixirs, no cat-like sight or sharpened breath. What they carried instead was patience, a discipline of the spirit that allowed them to stand still long enough to hear the truth beneath a creature's cry or the meaning hidden in a trembling leaf. He smiles faintly, a small curve of memory warming the cold air. Many came from scholarly traditions, herbalists, alchemists, scribe warriors who spent more time with dusty tomes than with blades. Others emerged from the wilds, hunters who tracked beasts not for glory, but to understand the peculiar rhythm of the land. And some, only a few, were wanderers whose path had been shaped by loss so profound that the world had peeled itself open to them like a grieving companion. The fire gives a soft pop, sending a thin orange line of sparks upward before settling again into the mellow glow that warms the stones of the keep. They crossed paths by chance, he continues, or by fate, depending on how one chooses to read the quiet signs that guide a soul along its road. Yet each meeting carried the same gentle recognition, the same subtle nod of shared purpose. They were seekers of knowledge, not soldiers, listeners, not conquerors. And so they found one another, like drifting embers drawn to the same hearth. The rain outside deepens in rhythm, its soothing chorus rolling through the hollow window frames like soft hands brushing over ancient wood. As their circle grew, he says, they began to exchange what little they knew. One taught the art of still breath tracking, listening to the subtle tremor of a creature's heartbeat through the earth beneath their palms. Another shared her understanding of decoctions brewed from rare grasses that grew only on mountainsides kissed nightly by frost. A third introduced early meditative forms, allowing the mind to settle until it could sense disturbances in the weave of ambient magic. His quill glides slowly across the page, marking the names of these early seekers with strokes that echo like whispers. These teachings were not yet formal, he says. No grand halls, no structured trials. Only quiet gatherings beneath the boughs of old forests or in the candlelit corners of forgotten monasteries. They practiced by moonlight. They wrote in journals bound with simple twine, and they trusted that over time, wisdom would reveal which paths were meant to diverge and which were destined to remain intertwined. A breath of wind slips through a crack in the stonework, carrying the cool scent of snow and the delicate perfume of wet pine bark. It was during such a winter as this, the Witcher continues, that 5 wanderers arrived at the same refuge on the same night, though none had sent word to the others. The place was humble, an abandoned watchtower nestled high among the blue mountains, its stones draped in frost and its hearth long forgotten. His voice softens further, as though reciting a tale given to him long before his own lifetime. There, within those icy walls, they shared their stories, their dreams, and the peculiar call of purpose that each had carried alone for so long. Some spoke of monstrous forms glimpsed at the edge of twilight, born of twisted magic rather than natural hunger. Others spoke of ancient manuscripts hinting at a world shifting beneath humanity's feet, and all of them admitted quietly that they felt something awakening, something that required a new kind of guardian. He lets the idea settle, like dust drifting through a sunbeam. That night, he says, they agreed to create a place of learning, a sanctuary for those willing to walk between the world of men and the wild mysteries beyond its borders. Not a fortress, not a citadel, but a school. A place where knowledge could be shaped, refined, and preserved. He turns another page. The parchment sighs. Kaer Morhen would come later, he whispers, but its soul was born in that watchtower of frost and quiet companionship. A lantern flickers gently, casting soft golden ripples along the broken walls. In the breath that followed this decision, he says, a subtle shift passed among them. Not a vow nor a ritual, only the warm sense that a shared path had been chosen, and that the world, in all its immense and silent wisdom, had heard. He closes the journal slowly, letting the cover rest beneath his palm. These were the first steps, he murmurs. Steps taken with humility, with wonder, and with a reverence for the mysteries that shaped all living things. From this foundation, the schools would eventually rise, each one growing from the earliest sparks of curiosity and silent courage. He leans back, listening once more to the gentle rain as it strokes the old stones of Kaer Morhen. So let us walk now, he whispers, into the roots of the first school, the one whose teachings would one day echo through every snowy chamber of this keep. The Witcher lets his fingertips rest upon the closed journal, as though feeling the quiet thrum of memory pulsing through its spine. A deep breath settles in his chest, warm and steady, and the cool air of the ruined hall seems to draw closer, listening. Before Kaer Morhen belonged to the wolf, he begins softly. There was no crest, no carved sigil, no proud emblem hanging from leather cords. There was only a philosophy, shaped slowly by the rhythm of the mountains themselves. The fire gives a gentle crack, its glow washing over fractured stone like a small sunrise unfolding in miniature. Dust drifts lazily through the amber light, turning each mote into a floating star. The wanderers who favored discipline and observation, he continues, found the mountains to be their most patient teachers. They listened to the slow language of stone, to the way each echo lingered in a cavern long after a footstep had faded. They studied the wolf packs that moved through the snow-heavy forests, not for their ferocity, but for their quiet coordination, their shared breath, their unspoken understanding. He opens the journal once more, and the soft rasp of parchment mingles with the gentle sigh of wind traveling through the broken shutters. In those days, he murmurs, the teachings were simple, not easy, but simple. A student learned first to breathe with the land, to steady their heartbeat until it aligned with the hush of the pines, the slow drip of meltwater, the delicate shift of frost on bark. Only then could they see clearly. Only then could they understand what the world wished to reveal. He turns a page, and the faint scent of ink rises, warm and nostalgic, as though the years themselves had soaked into each fiber. The early wolf adepts, he says, were taught to move not as hunters but as listeners, to wait for a branch to settle after bending in the wind, to feel the difference between the tremor of a hair and the tread of something older, wrought of magic and shadow. Patience was their first discipline, and silence their first companion. Outside, the rain softens slightly, thinning into a mist-like whisper that clings gently to the window stones. The witcher's voice grows even quieter, as though aligning itself with the softened weather. They trained in solitude, yet never in loneliness. Each novice was paired with a mentor who carried the calm steadiness of the mountains in their gaze. Lessons unfolded slowly, a single form practiced until the snow melted, a single tracking exercise repeated across seasons of rain and leaf fall. Nothing hurried, nothing forced. Knowledge was allowed to settle, like sediment drifting to the bottom of a clear stream. He smiles faintly, as if seeing a memory of someone long gone. One such mentor was known only as Ilvric, he whispers, a quiet soul who rarely spoke, yet when he did, his words carried the clarity of cold water. He taught that a witcher must be shaped from within, that no blade could cut true unless the spirit holding it was steady as a moonlit lake. A gust of wind brushes through the cracked stones, bringing with it the scent of wet roots, wild thyme, and the distant forests below the keep. The witcher closes his eyes for a moment, letting the fragrance pass over him like an old recollection. Ilvric's teachings guided the early wolves, he goes on. They learned to track by listening to the breath of the earth, to read the shallowest bend in the grass, to sense the pulse of ambient magic as it rose like a soft current beneath the soil. Only later would steel sharpen these senses, but in the beginning, everything was gentler, more inward, more attuned to patience than power. The witcher runs a thumb along the edge of the parchment, lifting a thin curl of dust that drifts peacefully downward. The students meditated often, he says. They would sit among the rocks for hours, feeling the mountain's deep stillness settle into their bones. Some spoke of hearing echoes of lives long before their own. Others felt only the comfort of being held by something vast and ancient. Both experiences were considered sacred. The fire crackles softly, shedding a new warmth through the hall. From these teachings, the witcher murmurs, the wolf sigil slowly emerged, not drawn at first, but felt. A symbol of poise, clarity, and a shared breath with the living world. When it was eventually carved into wood and stone, it was done with reverence, not pride. A reminder, not a banner. He turns another page, its texture roughened by time. Students of the earliest wolf path learn to embrace the cold, he says, not as hardship but as clarity. Snow sharpened the senses, frost taught resilience, winter nights reminded them that even the quietest world holds hidden life. He glances toward a shattered doorway where moonlight pools upon the floor like a silver lake. When Kaer Morhen was finally chosen as the resting place for their teachings, he whispers, it was not for its strength, nor its isolation, but for its serenity. The mountains around it carried the calm breath of the wolf, a patient stillness that cradled every step in gentle, frost-kissed silence. The rain outside resumes its soft, steady rhythm. He breathes in, letting the sound wash through him. And so, he says quietly, the first school began not with trial, nor with transformation, nor with steel, but with stillness, with listening, with the certainty that a witcher must first understand the world before ever seeking to protect it. Another page turns, another memory stirs. In time, he murmurs, others would diverge from this path, shaping their own schools from the threads of curiosity that pulled at their hearts. But the wolf was the beginning. He closes his eyes again, and the hall seems to breathe with him. Let us follow now the quiet footsteps of those who sought different ways, the ones whose spirits turned toward swiftness, fluidity, and the sharp intuition of a creature who walks alone. The Witcher remains still for a long moment, as though listening to something distant, something soft and delicate carried upon the rain-washed air. Only when the fire settles into a quiet sigh does he open the journal again, its spine releasing a faint creak like an old tree shifting beneath winter snow. Though the wolf path grew with calm discipline, he murmurs, not all wanderers found their spirits aligned with its steadiness. Some carried within themselves a restless curiosity, a desire not only to observe the world, but to slip through its edges, to feel its boundaries yield beneath a nimble step, a quickened breath, a sharpened intuition. He runs a fingertip across a page where ink has faded, to a soft brown gentle as dried leaves, pressed long ago between the covers of a cherished book. These were the wanderers, he continues softly, who listened to the world not from the stillness of mountain stone, but from the shadows beneath swaying branches, where moonlight broke into silver shards across the forest floor. Their hearts beat a little faster. Their thoughts moved like water, and their instincts curled and stretched like a waking feline. Beyond the cracked windows, a gust of wind stirs, sending droplets dancing along the ledge with a delicate tapping like fingers brushing lightly across glass. The early seekers of the cat path, he says, did not favor solitude as the wolves did, nor did they gather often. Instead, they wandered alone by choice, trusting their senses to carry them where knowledge waited. Some learned from hermits hidden deep in the underbrush, others from scholars who delighted in puzzles, riddles, and the ever-changing nature of the arcane. He pauses to turn a page, and the movement is so gentle that even the parchment seems reluctant to disturb the hush of the hall. One woman, he recalls, named Aelia of the Three Oaks, became a quiet legend among them. Her footsteps were said to be so soft that even the dew did not tremble beneath them. She could slip between branches without bending a single leaf, and she could sense the presence of magic, not by its strength, but by the faintest disturbance in the air around her. A thin smile touches his lips, warmed by memory. Yet she was not feared, nor revered. She was one studied, not as a master, but as an example of what the wandering heart could become when it learned to move with the rhythm of the world rather than against it. The fire crackles faintly, casting shadows that sway like soft curtains along the stone walls. The cat path grew from teachings such as hers, he says, lessons that prized flexibility, intuition, and the quiet art of slipping between thoughts as easily as between tree roots. Meditation for them was not stillness but motion, a sequence of slow, graceful forms performed beneath moon-kissed branches, each breath guiding the body into a softer, lighter presence. He inhales, drawing in the faint scent of damp earth carried by the wind, drifting through a gap in the stones. They trained with an emphasis on listening to the spaces between sounds, he murmurs. The flutter of a moth's wings, the subtle shift of bark beneath a climbing creature, the minute tremor of a spider's thread caught between two branches. To them, every whisper in nature was a thread in a tapestry of hidden meaning. Another page turns, its corner slightly curled from countless nights of study. The early cat adepts, he continues, rarely returned to the same place twice. Their journals were filled not with diagrams, but with fragments of poetry, sketches of moss patterns on stone, descriptions of fleeting sensations that shaped their understanding of magic's movement. They believed the world was always in motion, and therefore one must move with it. The Witcher dips his quill, the gentle tap of metal against ink echoing through the hall like a tiny chime. When the time came for each wanderer to choose a more permanent sanctuary, he says, those of the cat spirit hesitated. They admired the wolf's mountains, but found their stillness confining. They walked the valleys of the south, but felt the open plains left too much sky pressing upon their thoughts. His eyes soften. It was Aelia who discovered the place they had been seeking. A forested stretch of land filled with twisting roots, ancient oaks and ruins so intertwined with wild growth that stone and bark had long since become one. A place where boundaries were unclear, where paths changed with each season, where magic breathed differently depending on which beams of moonlight filtered through the canopy. He closes the journal gently, letting the silence settle around his words. This place, he says, became the cradle of the cat teachings. Not a fortress, and not a school in the structured sense, but a living labyrinth where adepts learned through exploration, through curiosity, through the delicate dance between shadow and light. Outside, the rain begins again, soft and rhythmic, washing through the ruins as though blessing the memory of those ancient forests. The cat sigil, he whispers, came not from stone, but from the flowing branches that framed their hidden sanctuary. Its shape was drawn from movement itself, from the arc of a leap, the curve of a branch, the flicker of a tail beneath starlight. He leans back, his voice now almost blending with the gentle rain. And thus, the second path took form, born of swiftness, instinct, and the quiet truth that the world reveals itself differently to those willing to walk lightly upon it. A soft silence follows, warm and contemplative. Next, he murmurs, let us turn toward the mountains of the high winds, where another philosophy waited to take shape. The Witcher rests his palms on either side of the journal, feeling the faint warmth left there by years of wandering hands. A calm breath moves through him, steady as the lantern flame that sways softly in the breeze passing through the old keep. The cat path was born of movement, he murmurs, but another arose from stillness of a different kind, not the grounded calm of stone, as the wolves taught, nor the fluid silence of forest shadow, as the cats embraced, but the vast and soaring quiet found only at the world's highest edges. He lifts his gaze toward the tall, broken archway, where night clouds drift past like slow-moving caravans of silver mist. The early Griffin wanderers, he says softly, were scholars before they were seekers. Men and women who studied scripts older than the kingdoms of men, scrolls that held traces of the first arcane disturbances ever recorded by mortal hands. They believed the world was shaped as much by thought as by blade and beast, and so they climbed mountains, seeking the clarity that only thin air and distant horizons could grant. He turns a page. The parchment whispers, and the scent of ink mingles with the cold air flowing through the open stones of Kaer Morhen. These scholars, he continues, were drawn to places where magic gathered in soft spirals, like invisible storms whirling above untouched peaks. Some said the mountains hummed at night, in frequencies too subtle for ordinary ears to perceive. Others felt that each sunrise carried with it a thin, golden thread of revelation, tugging gently at the mind. A faint smile warms his features, as if remembering a distant summit and the taste of cold wind on his tongue. They practiced meditations that sharpened intellect as well as spirit. Long hours spent gazing across valleys so vast that thought seemed to dissolve into the horizon. They believed understanding came not from seeking answers, but from allowing questions to expand within the quiet until wisdom appeared of its own accord. The fire crackles softly, spreading a subtle warmth through the hall's chill-bent air. One of the most notable among them, he says, was a man named Theron of the skylit peaks. He carried more books on his travels than weapons, yet could predict the shifting tides of magic with uncanny precision. He once spent an entire winter alone on a mountaintop, simply listening to the slow movement of the wind across frozen stone. The Witcher brushes a speck of dust off the journal's corner. Theron taught, he murmurs, that magic had a pulse, slow, ancient, and ever-present. To tap into it was not to dominate or control, but to align oneself with its patient rhythm. The Griffin adepts learned incantations not as spells, but as harmonic adjustments to the natural order. He turns another page, its edge softened by countless nights of study. While the wolves honed the body and the cats honed the senses, the griffins honed the mind. Their forms were slow, precise, each movement guided by breath and awareness. Even their footwork echoed geometric patterns drawn from ancient diagrams mapping the flow of arcane energies. Beyond the ruins, a distant rumble of wind rolls across the mountains, soft and hollow like a deep flute played by nature itself. It was Theron, the Witcher says, who discovered the sanctuary that would one day cradle the Griffin path. High above the cloud line, nestled between two immense cliffs shaped by time into sweeping arches, stood an ancient structure, half temple, half observatory, with pillars carved from stone the color of pale ash. His voice drifts into a soft hush. The place had been abandoned for centuries, yet the air within its halls was crisp and charged, as though knowledge still lingered like fine dust on the shelves. Wind slipped through the narrow slits in the walls, singing chords so gentle and pure that the scholars believed the structure itself was guiding their meditations. He closes the journal briefly, letting the memory rest. The Griffin sigil, he whispers, emerged naturally from this place, not from a creature they sought to emulate, but from the feeling of standing at the edge of the world, with wind roaring beneath their feet and understanding blooming like dawn light in the mind. He breathes, slow and contemplative. The early Griffin adepts learned that knowledge does not descend quickly. It unfolds, it stretches, it waits for the mind to be quiet enough to receive it. Their teachings were thoughtful, methodical, and always deeply respectful of the arcane forces that shaped the world's quiet heartbeat. The Witcher lifts his gaze again toward the fractured ceiling, where moonlight trickles through in soft silver ribbons. And so, he murmurs, the third school took form, built on intellect, harmony, and the gentle whisper of winds that have touched every corner of the world. A soft silence settles, warm and reflective. But there were others still, he continues, with spirits tuned to harsher terrains, places where storms carved the land and the sea spoke in restless murmurs. He turns another page. We shall walk next into those untamed regions, where the school of the bear began its slow, resonant rise. The Witcher lowers his gaze, letting the quiet corridor of memory settle around him like a heavy cloak warmed by time. The rain outside softens to a misty whisper, barely more than a breath upon the stone. He listens to it for a long moment, as though waiting for the world itself to finish speaking. When the early wanderers dispersed, he begins softly, some sought stillness, some sought motion, some sought thought, but a smaller group, a quiet, steadfast few, sought endurance. He brushes dust gently from the journal's cover, fingers moving with reverence. They were the ones drawn to rugged landscapes where winter storms roared like ancient spirits and cliffs stood unmoved against centuries of wind. These wanderers did not fear the cold, nor the crashing tides, nor the long silent nights spent beneath skies so vast that the soul felt small enough to become humble. He opens the journal slowly, and the pages release a soft, leathery sigh. These were the early forebearers of what would become the School of the Bear, he whispers, though they carried no sigil in those days, only a shared understanding that strength, true strength, was not force, but resilience. A log in the hearth shifts, sending a delicate trail of sparks upward before settling once more into a warm, amber glow. The bear wanderers, he continues, did not pursue knowledge of arcane currents as the griffins did. Nor did they slip through shadows with feline lightness as the cats preferred. They trained their minds, but did not seek the precise clarity of the wolves. He pauses, his breath blending with the cool air. What they sought was the quiet wisdom that emerges only through hardship, endured without complaint. The rain grows steadier, tapping softly at the cracked window stones like gentle fingertips. They climbed cliffs that scraped the sky. They built shelters from uprooted trees and slabs of frozen earth. They traveled into regions where storms gathered in dark spirals and thunder rolled like a beast stirring in its sleep. He turns a page, revealing sketches of mountain passes, their lines drawn in careful strokes that sag slightly with age. One wanderer among them, he says, became something of a quiet legend, a man named Moren, often called the Stonewalker. He was not swift, not graceful, not scholarly, but he was steady. A faint smile touches the witch's lips. Moren could endure days of freezing wind without faltering. He could walk across icebound lakes with a calmness so complete that even the cracking beneath his feet did not disturb his breath. He believed that every hardship was a teacher in disguise, and that a witch's heart must be carved with patience as much as with skill. The witcher places the journal aside for a moment, letting his hands rest upon his knees. Under Moren's guidance, he murmurs, the early bear adepts learned not to overcome adversity quickly, but to welcome it, to sit with discomfort until it revealed the quiet truths hidden beneath its surface. A gentle breath moves through the hall, stirring a few loose strands of parchment on the floor near the hearth. They meditated in blizzards, he says, allowing the sting of snow to sharpen their concentration. They practiced slow, grounded forms on rocky outcrops where the wind pushed against them with unyielding force. Their steps were steady, their breath slow, their hearts anchored. He describes it all with that same soft pacing, each word settling like falling embers. In time, he continues, they discovered a place that felt like home. A valley carved by ancient glaciers, surrounded by cliffs that bore the marks of centuries of storms. The air was crisp, rich with the scent of pine resin and the mineral tang of snowmelt. He closes his eyes briefly. At the valley's heart stood a massive stone structure long abandoned. Its walls were thick, its foundation deep, its chambers built to withstand anything the world might hurl against it. He opens his eyes again. This place became the cradle of the bear teachings, a sanctuary not of beauty nor refinement, but of steadfast peace. Within those walls, adepts learned the art of grounding themselves in every breath, every footstep, every moment of strain. The fire gives a soft, approving murmur. The bear sigil came from this understanding, he says, not from the creature's claws nor its strength, but from its endurance. its quiet acceptance of the world's harshest seasons. He turns another page, revealing a series of notes written in an elegant, steady script. Students of this school, he whispers, were taught that vulnerability was not weakness, but a doorway. Through endurance, they learned compassion. Through hardship, they discovered calmness. Through stillness, they found the strength to carry burdens without letting them harden the heart. Outside, the rain eases again, thinning into a soft, misty veil. And so, he murmurs, the bare path took its shape, built upon quiet perseverance, humility, and a deep-rooted sense that every challenge is merely another stone in the foundation of wisdom. He looks out across the hall, as though seeing the ancient valley standing in place of these ruined walls. There were more schools yet, he whispers, some born of distant shores, others of harsh deserts, others still of quiet, secluded enclaves, where rare traditions unfurled like hidden petals. His gaze softens. Let us walk next into those lesser-known paths, the ones whose teachings are nearly forgotten. For a long moment, the Witcher simply sits in silence, listening to the soft hum of the wind as it threads its quiet way through the broken stones of Kaer Morhen. The lantern flickers, casting long, warm shadows that sway across the floor like drifting memories. Though the wolf, the cat, the griffin, and the bear became the most well-known paths, he murmurs gently, there were others, quieter, more rare, shaped by landscapes and philosophies that stood far from these northern mountains. He lifts the journal again, opening it with a tenderness reserved for fragile things. A page crackles softly, aged and uneven, its ink faded into sepia whispers. These are the forgotten schools, he says. Not lost, not erased, simply carried on winds that do not often blow this far north. The fire gives a faint pop, as though leaning closer to listen. Let us begin with the viper, the Witcher continues, a path born in lands where sunlight sharpens every shadow, and the earth sleeps beneath layers of dust and heat. He touches a small sketch. 2 crescent blades cross delicately across a serpent emblem. The early viper wanderers were desert travelers, he whispers. They learned from the way dunes shift in silence, how wind carves new truths into old landscapes. Their teachings celebrated adaptability, the art of changing form, changing angle, changing intention, as fluidly as a serpent moves through sand. He turns the page. The parchment sighs. Viper adepts trained in abandoned temples, half swallowed by drifting earth. They meditated at dusk, when the sky glowed like molten copper, and the world held its breath between blistering day and frigid night. A faint smile warms the Witcher's steady voice. They were patient watchers, masters of subtle movement. They believed that understanding comes not from pursuit, but from waiting until the truth coils close enough to reveal itself. He breathes out slowly, letting the calm return. And then, he murmurs, there were the wanderers of the Manticore. Outside, the rain softens again, becoming a fine, gentle mist. These travelers roamed lands far to the southeast, he says, where ancient ruins rise from copper-colored sands and soft winds carry the scents of spice, dry stone, and blooming desert flowers that open only under moonlight. He traces another drawing, a stylized creature with curling wings and a proud leonine posture. Manticore adepts valued balance, he continues, the harmony between instinct and intellect, between strength and gentleness, between wandering and watching. He pauses, the fire crackling softly beside him. Their teachings began in stone courtyards surrounded by broken statues whose expressions had been worn smooth by time. Students practiced slow forms beneath star-streaked skies, their movements guided by the idea that even the fiercest force must be rooted in a peaceful heart. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the memory settle. The manticore sigil, he whispers, symbolized a unity between contrasting natures, earth and wind, passion and restraint, movement and stillness. He turns another page. There was also the crane, he continues softly, a school so elusive that many believe it to be a myth. A thin drawing of a long-legged bird stands in the margin, its posture serene. The early crane wanderers travelled coastlines and marshlands, where mist curled above quiet waters, and reeds swayed in slow rhythm with the tide. They trained balance above all things, the stability of the body, the clarity of the mind, the poise of the spirit even when the ground shifted beneath them. He looks upward, as if hearing distant waves. It is said, he murmurs, that a crane adept could stand upon a drifting log through an entire sunrise without disturbing a single ripple. The Witcher breathes deeply, letting the scent of damp moss drift through the hall. There were other schools still, he says, small enclaves that flared for a generation or two before dispersing like gentle sparks into the wider world. His voice becomes even quieter, as though mindful not to disturb their resting places. Some trained in hidden valleys, where flowering trees shed petals like snow. Some studied along wind-swept coasts, where storm clouds gathered like immense grey sails. Some practiced in jungles so thick with green life that sunlight trickled through in soft, shifting beams like liquid gold. He turns another page, this one blank, save for a faint imprint where words once lay. These forgotten teachings, he whispers, were not lesser, only rarer. They shaped witches whose paths diverged quietly from the others. And though their sigils have grown faint with time, the heart of their wisdom still lingers in forgotten places, where only the patient traveler may find it. The lantern glows softly, its flame curling gently like a cat settling into sleep. All these schools, he murmurs, however different in spirit, arose from the same longing, a desire to understand a world shifting beneath their feet, to bring harmony to places filled with mystery, to walk with courage, yet without haste. He closes the journal slowly, its pages resting as though exhaling. Now, he says, let us drift into the heart of Kaer Morhen itself, the cradle that held these teachings, the forge that shaped them, the quiet sanctuary that still remembers every step, every voice, every dream. The Witcher rests his hand on the journal once more, but he does not open it. Instead, he lets his fingers soften around its worn leather cover, as though feeling the faint pulse of the countless stories held within. A deep, quiet breath fills his chest, and he looks toward the far end of the hall, where moonlight spills gently across broken flagstones like liquid silver. All paths eventually led here, he murmurs softly, to these mountains, to these ruins, to this sanctuary that has known more seasons than any living Witcher. He allows the silence to bloom again, deep and wide as the rain outside softens into a steady, peaceful murmur. Kaer Morhen, he continues, was not always the shattered shell you see around us now. Long before its walls were broken and its courtyards left to the wind, it was a place of warmth, a place of learning, a place where wanderers from many paths gathered not as rivals, but as companions. His eyes soften, reflecting the gentle sway of the lantern flame. In those earliest years, he whispers, the keep seemed almost alive. The stones held warmth long after the fires died down. The halls echoed with quiet footsteps, soft laughter, the rustle of parchment as students hurried through their studies. Even the mountain winds seemed gentler here, as though respecting the purpose of those who dwelt within. He closes his eyes briefly, listening to the fire's slow crackle. The wolves trained here, but so did wanderers of other traditions. Before the schools diverged into distant sanctuaries, Kaer Morhen served as a place of union, a quiet crossroads where thoughts were exchanged, meditations were shared, and every corner of the keep carried traces of different philosophies. A page turns beneath his fingers, though the journal remains mostly closed, its spine creaking with fond familiarity. In the old days, he says, the keep had many chambers. The warm hall of records where scrolls were kept beneath, waxed cloth and cedar planks. The training yard where snow was swept aside each dawn so students could practice breathwork beneath the rising sun. The alchemical wing where the air always smelled of crushed herbs and warm resin. A faint scent of imaginary cedar seems to drift through the ruined hall as he speaks, light and comforting. But the heart of Kaer Morhen, he murmurs, was neither its laboratories nor its library, but its inner sanctum. He breathes out slowly. A quiet chamber carved deep into the mountain stone itself. It held no torches and no windows, only a circular pool of still water fed by underground springs that trickled into the room with a sound soft as dream breath. He lets the image form gently before continuing. Students were brought there in their first winter at the keep. Not for trial, nor for challenge, nor for transformation, but simply to listen. He traces an invisible shape across the journal's cover. The water reflected the faintest glimmers of lantern light carried by the mentors, and when the lanterns were extinguished, the room became a sanctuary of pure darkness. Not frightening, not heavy, but enveloping. A space where sound became soft and measured, where breath felt slow and meaningful, where each witcher learned to feel their own presence as though meeting themselves for the first time. He lifts his gaze to the broken pillars above. This chamber was called the Hall of Echoes, he says, and for good reason. If you spoke within it, even in the faintest whisper, the room returned your words, not as reflections, but as softened memories. The echoes felt older, gentler, as though the keep itself were responding. A hush settles over his voice, warm and reverent. It was said that every witcher, no matter their school or philosophy, left a trace of their spirit within the Hall of Echoes. And over time, that place became more than a room. It became a living archive of breath, of intention, of quiet determination. He draws a slow breath, the lantern glimmering upon his brow. But Kaer Morhen was more than rituals, he continues. It was home, a sanctuary in winter, a refuge in storming nights. The scent of birchwood fires would drift down every corridor. Warm bread softened the cold mornings. Mentors rose early to clear snow from the stairways. Novices fetched water from the frozen well and returned with cheeks flushed and spirits bright. The witcher's smile is soft, nostalgic. And there were evenings, he whispers, when the entire keep grew quiet after long hours of study or training. One could hear the gentle clatter of a quill somewhere down the hall, the turning of pages in the library alcove, the distant moan of winter wind circling the highest towers, and beneath it all, the slow, rhythmic breathing of a place alive with purpose. He turns a final page, revealing a faded sketch of the keep as it once stood, strong-walled, warm-lit, nestled in the mountains like a guardian at rest. This, he murmurs, was the true heart of Kaer Morhen. Not its walls, nor its training grounds, nor its rituals, but its quiet histories, the gentle echoes of countless witchers who passed through these halls with open hearts and weary feet. He closes the journal with a soft, careful motion. And though the stones around us now have fallen into ruin, he whispers, their spirit endures, for mountains remember, wind remembers, and somewhere within these ancient halls, the old stories still breathe. The lantern flame steadies, casting a warm circle of light around him. Now, he murmurs, let us drift deeper still, into the meditative practices and quiet rites that shaped the Witcher's inner journey. The Witcher lifts the lantern slightly, just enough that its glow warms the edges of the journal and paints a soft ember-like sheen across the carved stone floor. The fire hums contentedly, its calm rhythm matching the slow cadence of his breath. "Though much is said," he begins softly, "about the Witcher's trials, their potions, their blades, the quieter parts of their training were always the truest heart of their transformation." He settles deeper into his seat, letting the lantern swing gently, casting wavering halos of gold over the old pillars. The Witchers were shaped not by hardship alone, but by understanding, by learning the contours of their own minds with the same dedication used to study the land. A soft rain whispers at the windows, its delicate rhythm blending seamlessly with his voice. One of the earliest meditative rites, he says, was known simply as the listening hour. He pauses, allowing the quiet to expand around his words. In this practice, students would sit in one of the keep's open courtyards at dawn or dusk, the two moments of the day when the world rests between breaths. They were instructed not to empty their minds, as some traditions teach, but to fill themselves with the sounds around them. He closes his eyes, illustrating the memory with stillness. The distant murmur of wind as it curled through the battlements, the soft tap of melting snow dripping from stone, the faint rustle of sparrows nesting within the rafters, even the beating of their own hearts as it settled from the exertions of training. The lantern warms the space around him, softening the shadows until they feel less like darkness and more like a blanket. This practice, he continues, taught patience, awareness, the understanding that every creature, every breath, every shifting leaf had its place in the quiet tapestry of life. He opens the journal again, revealing a page filled with elegant, looping script. Another rite, he murmurs, was the walk of still steps. His fingertip traces the words gently. Students moved through the keep as silently as possible, not to sneak, not to hide, but to understand how their bodies interacted with the world around them. He smiles faintly. They learned how stone felt beneath soft-soled boots, how snow compressed under careful footing, how breath could be guided to warm, chilled fingers on winter mornings. The fire shifts, its glow deepening. There was also the rite of embers, he says, voice low and warm. A nighttime meditation held in the keep's central hall. Students gathered around a single fire, its flames crackling softly, its light dancing across their faces. He breathes deeply, as though recalling the precise scent. The hall would fill with the aroma of pine resin and slow-burning birch. Mentors spoke not of lessons, but of stories. Old tales passed down, softened with each retelling until they felt less like history and more like lullabies. His thumb brushes lightly over the edge of the parchment. These shared stories were a way of teaching that witches were never truly alone. Even in the deepest wilds, the warmth of past voices traveled with them. The Witcher leans back, gazing up at the cracked ceiling where moonlight falls in thin, serene ribbons. Another deep rite, he murmurs, was practiced in the Hall of Echoes, the same chamber I spoke of earlier. A soft exhalation. There, each student would confront the sound of their own presence, not with fear, not with judgment, but with curiosity. He closes the journal gently. You see, he continues, the echoes in that room did not return harshly. They softened, they stretched. They came back older, gentler, as though reshaped by the keep itself. He folds his hands in his lap. This taught students that everything they projected into the world, every thought, every whisper, every hesitation, would come back to them in some softened form, and that in understanding this exchange, they could better understand themselves. Wind slips softly through the broken windows, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant pine. And then, he says, There were the private meditations, practices tailored to each school, each temperament. He lifts a finger, as though counting the unseen threads of memory. The wolves meditated on breath and balance, aligning their hearts with the quiet rhythm of snow-covered earth. The cats meditated in motion, flowing through slow sequences beneath moonlight, learning the art of intuitive presence. The griffins meditated in solitude at height, on cliff edges where the world stretched wide below, where philosophy opened like a map of stars across the mind. And the bears meditated in the embrace of harsh elements, standing unflinching before icy winds until their spirits found unshakable calm. He allows a deep quiet to settle between the words. All these practices, he whispers, wove together to shape witches not as warriors, but as mindful travelers through a world alive with mystery. The rain grows even lighter, almost like a mist settling into sleep. And though these rites are seldom spoken of today, the Witcher murmurs, they remain in the bones of the keep, in the echoes of the halls, in the memories of those who still walk this path. He glances toward the doorway where moonlight pools softly. And now, he says quietly, as our tale nears its resting point, let us return once more to the Witcher in meditation, here among the ruins, and listen as his reflections dissolve gently into the night. The Witcher sits in silence, long enough for the lantern's flame to shrink and swell in gentle rhythm, long enough for the last drops of rain to slide down the window stones and disappear into the night's soft breath. He lays the journal beside him, its cover worn smooth by years of quiet companionship, and rests one hand upon it as though feeling the faint warmth of every story it carries. Outside, the wind drifts through the mountains with a voice like distant memory, not calling, not warning, simply passing, unhurried and wise. So here we are, the Witcher murmurs, his voice as soft as the fading fire, at the edge of the tale, not its end, only its quiet turning. He looks across the ruined hall, where the moonlight pools in silver patches, glowing gently against the broken stones that once bore the footsteps of novices, mentors, wanderers, those long-gone figures whose echoes still cling to the cold mountain air. Kaer Morhen remembers, he says, almost to himself, not in the loud ways that cities remember, but in the gentle imprint of breath on old stone, in the lingering warmth left behind by old hearths, in the soft dust that rises from every step taken here. The lantern flickers faintly, its glow mellow and golden, almost sleepy. But when I close my eyes, he whispers, I can still hear the turning of pages in the old library, the quiet scraping of quills as students copied ancient diagrams, the gentle exhale of the mountain wind as it slipped between the rafters, all of it blending, like layers of soft parchment, into a single patient hush. He inhales slowly, letting the memory fill him, letting it settle deep. And though time has weathered the keep and scattered the schools to distant places, their spirit remains. The wolves with their calm breath, the cats with their fluid steps, the griffins with their soaring minds, the bears with their steadfast hearts, and all the quiet wanderers whose teachings lived only briefly before drifting into legend. The Witcher lowers his head, as though listening to something beneath the surface of the quiet. Even now, he murmurs, the stones whisper, not with words, but with presence. With the gentle assurance that the world is older than our worries and wiser than our fears. The fire softens again, embers glowing with the last warmth of evening. He draws his cloak a little closer around his shoulders, not for protection, but for comfort, a simple acknowledgement of the cool air settling into the hall. You've walked far with me tonight, he says softly, addressing the listening quiet as much as the listener. You've wandered through forests, across mountains, into deserts and ruins, and finally here, to the silent heart of the Witcher's long memory. He lifts his gaze toward the archway, where the moon floats between drifting clouds, its light gentle enough to soften every sharp edge of the night. Rest now, he whispers, as the old stories rest. Let your breath fall into a slow rhythm, steady and kind. Let your thoughts loosen like snow slipping from a quiet branch. There is no need to hold anything now, no need to wander further than the next soft inhale, the next peaceful exhale. The wind quiets, settling into a low hum that feels almost like a lullaby woven through stone. The mountains will keep watch, he murmurs, and the ruins will breathe with you. And somewhere deep within these halls, the echoes of those ancient rites will rise and fall with your own quiet dreaming. His eyes drift halfway closed. Sleep comes gently here, he says, voice low as embers, as gently as turning a page, as softly as footsteps on fresh snow, as quietly as the old keep settling deeper into the night. He lets the lantern dim further, its golden glow shrinking into a warm, trembling seed of light. May your rest be deep, he whispers, and your dreams untroubled. May the wind brush softly against you, and may the echoes of old wisdom carry you into calm. The lantern flickers one final time, casting a faint shimmer across the stones of Kaer Morhen. Then silence returns, a comforting, ancient silence, and the Witcher closes his eyes, his breath merging with the steady heartbeat of the mountain. And as the fire fades and the night settles and the world drifts gently onward, the story drifts with you into sleep.